with all the parts cleaned up, or potentially if you have brand new parts, we're going to talk about reassembly and where to lubricate. So the first thing is going in reverse order. So we took the rotor off last. That means the rotor is going to go on first. Now, when you're holding the rotor, you need to make sure that you're not coming in contact with either of the braking surfaces. As soon as you have any type of lubricant or cleaner on your hands, it's going to contaminate the surface. For our case, this is a shop vehicle, so this might not be perfectly clean, but we need to make sure that we do not contact any of those surfaces, and we can do that in multiple ways of holding that rotor. Now, the rotor needs to have some lubricant put on it, but onto the hub itself. So around that center hub, where the center of the rotor will go onto, and that will prevent it from rusting on later during a future brake job. Once that's been lubricated with some anti-seize, we're going to place that on and let it sit. I will then carefully put on the lug nuts to prevent losing them and to keep everything in place. Just a couple turns each for right now. Okay. Next, let's talk about the caliper bracket. So the caliper bracket has been cleaned, especially in those locations. Now it's time to put it back in. Now the two bolts, I have already put on some anti-seize, and I'm going to just show you how to do that. This is anti-seize. It comes in a bottle. Okay, going to take off as much as possible. We only need a little bit onto our bolts. Okay, and we just want a little brush along those threads. We don't need a lot of content on those bolts. Put this off to the side. Grab your bracket, and again, watching that we don't come in contact with the rotor, we want to get this bracket back in place. I like to start with the bottom one. It is the easier one to get to. Once it has been started, it now acts as a pivot point. So we're going to grab our other bolt, which I have put anti-seize on already, and we're going to get to our top bolt. Once those are on, put them in hand tight. Once they're hand tight, they're going to need to be torqued to the proper torque spec. So you're going to have to find that on all data or on our repair manuals using a torque wrench for the proper torque spec for those bolts. We're not going to be demonstrating that in this lab. For this lab, I am just going to be tightening them just briefly with a ratchet to get them solidly mounted. Our next thing that we need to do is work on our brake pads. So our brake pads will start with the slide guides. So these are these shiny things. I have pre-lubricated them with anti-seize as well, and those are going to go in the positions as we took them off. Now, because I have pre-lubricated them, we need to make sure that we do not press them or have them come in contact with the rotor. So we're going to place that inside, trying to touch them as minimally as possible, touching them more on the sides of the pieces themselves. Make sure that they are centered in between so that they don't touch the rotor. Do the bottom one. Again, making sure that they don't touch the rotor. Making sure that they're firmly in place. And now we will go to the brake pads. Now we go for our brake pads. Now brake pads need anti-seize as well, so we're going to take that anti-seize, brush off a little excess, and we're just going to put it on the edge, making sure not to contact the pad itself. We want to make sure that we keep all lubricant away from the actual pad. Okay, making sure hands are clean while we're doing this as well. So just on both sides. Once you're done that, make sure that you have the right one going in the right position. Slide these in place. Okay, inside and outside. I have already lubricated the back one. Making sure that the back one does have that squealer or that warning marker. Okay. And now our brake pads are reassembled into our unit. Now we'll draw our attention to the actual caliper itself. Now it needs anti-seize on two locations. The first location is the big ring here, which is the piston, and then the two locations where the pad's going to touch here. Before we can actually put any lubrication on, we need to press this piston back in. Now the reason we need to push it back in is because as the brakes are being applied with the pedal, that piston has been forced out with hydraulic fluid, and it is pressing these two brake pads together on the rotor, and that is how braking happens. So we need to return that piston back to its neutral position all the way back in, and we need to do that with one of two tools. Now the two tools we have in our shop, one is a specialty tool, brake piston caliper tool, and one's a simple C-clamp. Either one can be used in this situation as long as it's being pressed in nice and slow. I show you the C-clamp method and the more expensive tool method because you can have either one at home or in the shop, and you can use either one. So for the very fancy tool, what you need to do is you need to push it back in, place this tool inside the caliper, press the trigger, and it will slowly work its way to the back of the piston and push it back in. Now, to release it, you pull this back, okay, take it out, and now I'm going to show you the method with the C-clamp. Okay, the C-clamp is quite simple. It goes inside the piston. As you loosen it off, almost there. Okay, and as that C-clamp is in, we're going to tighten it up now. We're going to press on the back of that caliper and the piston and slowly retract it back in place. So wanted to show you another method quickly. So if the piston is too deep for this tool to go into, or even for the C-clamp to be used, what you can do is you can grab an old brake pad if you are replacing your brake pads, or alternatively, grab a flat piece of metal, place it over the opening of that piston, and then apply the tool in the exact same way against that metal plate, and then at that point you will see the piston of the caliper start to retract in. But this is only if if you can't get the tool into the piston and you're only using a metal plate or an old brake pad, not a new brake pad or one that you're reusing. Release that out, get the tool out, get the metal bar out, and now we're ready to lubricate. We grab our anti-seize, again taking off what we don't need. We're going to lubricate just that round disc, the outside of that piston. Lubricate the two markers here where it comes in contact with the brake pad. Put that away. And before we try and put this on, I want to get the bolts ready. Now the bolts are quite simple. I have both of the threads already pre-lubed with anti-seize, but the slide pins need to be lubricated with a brake grease. So we just need to take a little bit of grease out of this container. Just a little amount. And we then want to lubricate the pin all the way around. This will help the caliper slide, which I will show you in a few minutes. Okay, so I've lubricated the other pin as well. We're going to take the bungee cord off, place the brake caliper over the brake pads. If there's any rubber boots, make sure that they're properly installed and not twisted or bent. And the slide pins go into place and get threaded in by hand. So with the caliper in place, the slide pins and bolts in location and torqued to the proper specifications, now we turn our attention to getting the brake system ready for testing. We always want to make sure that we take the bungee cord out of the way because this can cause a lot of damage if it's left in place. Okay, and as you can see right now, the rotor is still floating, and right now the caliper is floating as well. So next we're going to demonstrate what you need to do after you complete a brake job, and that is giving the brake pedal at least 3 to 4 presses with the engine off, and you should see this stop moving. That should then have the piston interact with the brake pads and hold the rotor nice and firmly, and you're going to see that now. And with that, your brake job should be complete as long as you see no leaks, you have tightened everything and torqued everything, and made sure that any little fingerprints or lubrication has been removed from the rotors or from the brake pads themselves. Thanks for watching.